students, we can improve the whole system. ECHO has been successful thanks to the participation of parents and the participation of the community as a whole. We have been lucky enough to secure most community organizations in Oakland to support us. And now, presenting the case for educational reform on behalf of English learners. ECHO has been brought together several persons who are experienced and experts in working with cases like the one confronting Oakland and the state of California English learners. Kenji Hakkuta, Professor Emeritus from Stanford University. Lily Wong Filmore, Professor Emerita from UC Berkeley. Peter D. Roos, Educational Equity Lawyer, retired. And su servidora, Emma Chavez Roos. We begin with a look at how English learners are faring in our schools. What is the evidence that things need serious rethinking and reform? We will look at performance data from English learners from the state of California as well as Oakland. We find cause for concerns. So Lily will look at what's needed and argue the case for providing students with the instructional support required to school. Peter will consider such support from the perspective of educational equity. How can we tell if proposed solutions are likely to work or not? Kenji will comment on crucial role played by leaders at the district schools and at the school sites that will give us confidence that programs work as they should for English learners. And finally, we will close by talking about how important it is the participation of parents and the community in all this.
And
And
Lily.
And now I am presenting to you our lovely Lily. Here she is.
Hi, everyone. We're trying to figure out the technology here, trying to change chairs and trying to move about. So this symposium focuses on literacy and justice in learning. Now, we all know that literacy is foundational to school performance. It affects progress across the curriculum. For many students, literacy can be a barrier to school learning and to gaining the language and knowledge that are foundational to academic progress. But there's a lot of cause for concern in how well English learners are doing in gaining these crucial skills. If we take a look at the data from the California assessment for academic progress and student and performance for English language arts, we can see that there is cause for concern, very huge causes for concern. Now, I'm going to fade myself out so that you can see this chart entirely. Now, the green on the bars represent students who have exceeded the standard in California for the 4th grade. Brown indicates standard met for English language arts. Yellow is almost there, but not quite. And the gray in the bar represents standard not met. Now, as you can see, nearly 50% of all students in California are at the have met the standard or exceeded the standard. And if you take a look at the next bar over from the left, California English language learners, you will see that 17.59% have met or exceeded the standards. Now, take a look at Oakland students, and the bar, the third one over from the left, shows that 35.7% have met or exceeded the standards. For fourth graders, only 6.98, not quite 7% of Oakland's English learners have met the standard. Now take a look at the 8th grade. Again, 49.4% of all students in California have met that standard. 6.18% have met the standard or exceeded it for California. For Oakland, for all students, 31% have met or exceeded the standard, and sadly, only 2.6% of English learners have met the standard and none, by the way, exceeded it. So, this is a real cause for concern. As we know, serious, heavy-duty language learning and literacy development takes place in the early elementary years. But the job is supposed to be done by the end of the 3rd grade. By 4th grade, students are expected to put those skills that they've learned to the really serious work of subject matter learning. Literacy in the service of science learning, in math, in literature, history, and so forth. Now, kids who don't master the literacy skills taught in the early years do not have the tools required for meaningful access to the school's curriculum thereafter. And sadly, those who enter high school without well-developed and practiced literacy skills will have difficulty in the coursework that prepares them for college or the work world in the 4 years they will spend there. And in fact, whether they make it to graduation at all. So that's what we've got to worry about. Now, there is a reciprocal relationship between language and literacy development. Literacy is based on language, and prior fluency in the language of literacy is usually assumed in instruction. Ideally, students know the language well enough for instruction to be effective. For English learners, literacy development in language they already know is ideal. Then they don't have to wrestle with the sound system, trying to decode in a language with sounds they don't really fully hear, that aren't really clear to them at all. So learning to read and write in language you already know, the language you bring to school from home, is ideal. Now, bilingual education is not always available or possible, so the question is, how do you develop language and literacy skills simultaneously? See, this is simultaneously. While you're learning the language, you are also learning how to read and write in it. It can happen, but it's a tough road to hoe at best, which is why outcomes are so often dismal. So what it takes is special instructional methodology, specialized knowledge of how to teach language and literacy simultaneously, and materials, a curriculum which provide guidance on how to make such a complex undertaking work. Now, teachers can make it happen, but it takes extraordinary understanding, skill, effort, and time, often at tremendous personal cost to teachers, by the way, for it all to come out. Just think of what it means, especially if you're working with a curriculum that materials that do not advance that at all. So teachers have been able to do it. They have. It's amazing to me when it happens at all. But I know that when it does, it's because these are teachers who have really, really worked hard to find ways to get around the problem of materials that don't support them. Now, a much more reasonable solution would be a well-designed, fully developed, and tested curriculum that provides teachers with supportive guidance. I've been really, really worried about this. Look, I've done a couple of big reviews lately, on English language arts curricula that are used widely in California's public schools, including, by the way, Oakland public schools in the past. And let me just tell you that for teachers to make some of these things work at all takes hours and hours and hours of trying to figure out how you can find workarounds, curricula that is poorly developed and planned, all right? So really good curricula are available, but they are rare. The programs that come to mind are ones that have been developed by teams of educators who understand how teaching and learning happen and who have found ways to overcome obstacles to student learning. And by the way, I was getting all fixed up to argue that Oakland should search for such curricula, especially for ones that provide teachers guidance on how to work with students whose language situations or needs are like the ones found in Oakland classrooms. But it appears that Oakland decided to do just that more than a year ago. It looked at various programs. It identified some candidates for thorough testing in many schools. And that led to the selection of 2 English language arts programs, the EL Education, which stands for Expedition Learning Education for Oakland's K-5 schools, and Benchmarks Adelante curriculum for schools with Spanish-English bilingual programs. The EL Education program is highly rated, and by the way, in the handout that I put online for you, you should take a look at the ed reports on it. It's really highly rated. Benchmarks is less so, but there are very few bilingual curricula to choose from. And so Adelante, the benchmark Adelante seems to be a very promising one, and I think that there will need to be some workarounds, but I think that is going to be happening, all right? So every now and then something pops up in front of me. Okay, now to have a real impact on student learning, an English language curriculum must provide ample support for teaching foundational reading and writing skills. And if the language of literacy is English, it's got to deal with its inconsistencies and oddities. And if you think about the English writing system, it there's a good enough matched for reading to be learned, the reading skills to be learned. But honestly, there are so many inconsistencies that, the curriculum really has to deal with that. And I think that is something that is critical to to any successful curriculum. It has also got to offer well-structured, really meaty instructional experiences, and that is in richly designed units. Units where there are high quality, complex texts that provide students with opportunities to gain knowledge and familiarity with topics and contents that can be foundational for further learning and study. You know, as I looked at those curricula, one of the things that really jumped out at me when I looked at the EL education materials, for example, was that one text built on the ones that came before. Each curricula, each text in the program seemed to provide background knowledge for understanding complex materials that followed it. And so the idea of getting kids really excited, involved in learning, eager to learn more, is something that is either built into a curriculum or it isn't. But it also has to provide access to vocabulary. You know, this is a big part of learning a language that is necessary to academic development in school. The grammatical structures and the rhetorical devices that are characteristic of written language and can be learned and are used primarily in written discourse. In fact, you know, as we think about what it takes to develop the language skills needed for school, this is why literacy is so very critical. You know, if the materials don't invite kids to think and to imagine how to use it on their own in learning, it really isn't doing what it should be doing. There has also got to be ample opportunities to delve into complex texts, lots and lots of texts to provide for understanding, for language development, and to build that knowledge base. Now, with that, I am going to turn things over to Peter Roos for some additional considerations.
Okay, here's Peter Roos with some additional considerations. What I'd like to do is, first of all, I'm a civil rights lawyer was heavily involved in litigation around language policies in schools for a number of years and was involved in a number of the major cases. And I'd like to talk about a couple of the cases, not only because of the sort of the legal standards that you are bound by, or you who are working in the schools are bound by, but also because they provide a pathway for determining what really needs to be done for these students. They're sort of surprising. You think of a legal case as setting a sort of a dry legal standard, but what has happened in these cases is that the courts were compelled to think through what school districts really need to do to try to provide a responsive program for English language learners. The first case is one that probably everyone here has heard of, and that's Lau versus Nichols. And it's a case that goes back to 1974, I believe. And it was a case that came out of San Francisco, the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court case. And the backdrop of this, which seems sort of remarkable in liberal San Francisco, was that the San Francisco schools maintained that they had no obligation to do anything special for English language learners, that they had a obligation to offer a program to the kids who showed up, but kids who had unusual needs, such as language needs, had to deal with those needs themselves. Those were problems that had to be addressed by the parents or otherwise. And the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, in a unanimous opinion, ruled that that is not the case, and that it violates the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to not take affirmative steps to address the unique needs of English language learners. And that was really a breakthrough, because before that, school districts felt that they could pretty much just get away with doing nothing. Now, I must say, I mean, obviously, places like Oakland have, as Lily has indicated, broad curriculum that they've developed and the like to try to deal with this. But on a school by school basis, we sometimes find that very little is, in fact, really being done for kids. And that if that is the case, then there are potential violations of Title VI in the Lau versus Nichols case. Following Lau, Congress decided that they ought to step in and provide at least some sort of further guidance to the Supreme Court ruling. And they passed the Equal Educational Opportunity Act, which basically did not, in its terms, say much more than Lau did. It basically said that school districts must provide an appropriate response to the needs of English language learners. That then had to be, what that meant had to be determined by the courts. And there is one sort of stellar court case that in which a judge, in sort of the best thinking that you think of when you think of what a judge can do, did in interpreting appropriate action. And it was in a case called Castaneda versus Pickard. It came out of South Texas, and it involved a challenge to the adequacy of, it involved a challenge to a number of things, but it was basically brought on behalf of Latino kids who were, and there was affirmative action issues. There were just a range of issues, but the main one was that the English language learners were not getting an appropriate responsive program. And a number of us worked on trying to help the court to develop a standard for evaluating whether the school district was doing what was appropriate. And Judge Randall in the Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which is just below the Supreme Court, was the judge who finally rendered a decision in this case. And it has been adopted. The decision has been adopted by the Office for Civil Rights, the United States Office for Civil Rights. It's been adopted by most state departments of education. It is sort of the gold standard that is followed by at least responsive and responsible oversight agencies to determine whether schools and school districts are doing what they ought to be doing. So let me run through the standards that Judge Randall set forth in evaluating the adequacy of a school program. The first thing she said is that a school district must have an adequate conceptual approach for addressing the needs of these kids. And that approach has to be something that is supported by reasonable experts who believe that the program will work. Now, the question is, and I think that this is something for everyone to listen to, is what does it mean to work? And what they had in mind was what Judge Randall had in mind, and what the people who carried Castaneda forward have in mind, is that it must work in really two respects. First of all, it's got to be educationally supportable program to teach kids English, and not just teach kids some English, but teach them the sort of English that is needed to succeed in the schools. To give you a flavor, I had a case at one stage in Denver, Colorado, in which the school district presented some evidence that showed that kids came to school, English language learners came to school with no English. They took kids who had no English, and that after a period of time, they actually had made substantial progress in learning English. Well, what the progress really was the sort of stuff that you get from watching television rather than you get from a concentrated program to teach kids the sort of English that they need to make it in school. This all is school based. This all has a school basis, and so what schools really really need to be doing is to have an expert-based program that is reasonably designed to teach kids English in a reasonable period of time. Now, that is often school districts say, well, that's what we've done, and we can wash our hands of it. But the fact of the matter is that Judge Randall envisioned something else as well, and that it is that ultimately these kids have to be able to be fully competitive with their English-speaking peers. And you cannot devote your full attention to teaching English and forget teaching the other stuff that other kids are learning. You may be able to have some sort of a short-term concentrated program in English, recognizing there's limits in days to do things. But if that's the way you choose to proceed, rather than having sort of a bilingual program that has dual functions of teaching English as well as teaching subject matter, then you've got to make it up. And you've got to make it up with a concentrated program so that ultimately these kids are fully competitive with their English-speaking peers. And you heard the data that Lily spoke about earlier, and it does not appear that Oakland is doing very well in those regards. So clearly there is need for self-evaluation of where things are going. So the first prong of Castaneda, which I've set forth, has to do having to have an expert-based approach to address two distinct issues. The next is having the resources to carry them out so that they are successful in teaching kids to achieve the English and achieve subject matter learning. And the key resource has to do with teachers, having teachers who are fully trained. I've had a number of cases in which people had teachers who had, came in, or most of the English language learners were taught by substitute teachers or taught by other teachers who really had very limited experience or training in working with English language learners. And you can have the greatest program in the world, but if you don't have people who are fully trained in how to execute that program, you ain't going to have you're not going to have success. And Judge Randall recognized that. And other courts have as well. I'll give you a flavor. In Florida, we had a case in which we had to deal with a situation in which there was no required training for the teachers, and we negotiated with the state that not only should teachers henceforth go through a training program at universities, but that in the meantime they go through a 300-hour clock hour training program to specifically geared to working with English language learners. Now, I'm not holding out that 300 hours is any magical number or that what we did was 100% correct, but the point is that there really does need to be major training of teachers in order to have any hope that you're going to have success whatsoever. I might add, in Florida also, we also required that principals have something like 60 or 70 hours of training. And the notion is that if principals are supposed to provide oversight of teachers, they've got to have the training to know what teachers should be doing. So that was another element of our Florida consent decree. So you have to have, first of all, you have to have a well thought out program sponsored by or backed by responsible experts who, in the field of English language learners. Then you've got to have materials. And materials, the key material is teachers, but then of course there is more than teachers. And Lily talked about curriculum, and a key curriculum is clearly a piece of that. That is good. So you've got two things that should be evaluated and should be on everybody's mind. But that doesn't cut it with Castaneda. The third prong is that there needs to be regular evaluation of the program to make certain that what you've done is in fact succeeding. The sorts of numbers that Lily came up with, would suggest that there's some serious problems in Oakland, so that things are not succeeding. And I must say that the test is not so much is testing individual students, although obviously that's a crucial part of the puzzle. But you've got to look at how the overall system is responding to the needs of these kids. And if the overall system is not responding, then there is a fourth prong. And the final prong is that you've got to adjust your program in an educationally supportable, supported by experts in the field of English language learning. You've got to adjust your program to try to address the failures that pop up in the evaluations. So that there's really what I'd consider a four-prong analysis that everyone ought to be giving to their schools, and it really is. It's looking at the school system, but it ought to be at the school site level too. I mean, we've all seen wonderful schools, and then down the road a school that just ain't cutting it at all. So that it is not really enough to have just a district-wide evaluation, but the schools ought to be evaluated using those four standards as well as school systems themselves, and there ought to be a regular evaluation using those four prongs by the central office of the district, as well as, and often is, the requirements coming from the state along those lines. Often there is a sort of an empathy that regulators have that sort of let people get away with things. I think that increasingly there's going to have to be pressure on regulators to put aside their empathy and make certain that kids really do achieve the sorts of standards that we expect of them. And with that, I will turn things over to Kenji.
Okay.
Great.
Kenji.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma, for the great introduction, and to Lily presenting to us the curriculum opportunities. And Lily, just as a heads up, there was a comment in the chat asking about early literacy programs and how and questioning whether the EL education approach is going to really hit kids much earlier than when they really need some of the foundational skills. So maybe you might want to address that. But thank you for talking about the opportunity that comes up around the curriculum. And Peter, thank you for giving us a seminar on the legal framework that comes out of the Civil Rights Act and more of the civil rights framework for that students through which the students have rights to particular education. I've worked in the field of bilingualism and second language acquisition for a long time, and kind of entered into it from some of the early debates that were going on in the 1960s and 70s that seemed to have a very unrealistic time frame for kids learning the amount of time that the system gives to kids to learn their second language, English. And it was very much, there was a period when the federal law tried to specify that 6 months was about the amount of time that kids needed to learn English. And that seemed quite unrealistic to me. And I kind of got into that, the question of how long should policy allow for kids to ramp up their English language skills so that they're competitive in the so-called regular curriculum. But at the same time, when you're thinking about the program from a civil rights perspective, that's very much a deficit perspective. It's really about trying to make up for the deficit that kids who don't speak English need to have. And it really doesn't address the assets of bilingual kids, their native language that they bring to the school, the kind of home literacy support that the kids might have. And that's not a space that can be addressed very easily in the civil rights space. It's really more about language rights, bilingualism as a human right and so forth. And that's kind of outside of the traditional civil rights conversations. But I'd like to also address not just sort of the kind of the deficit reduction piece of this, but also the asset recognition components of what we're trying to do, and the different places in the policy arena where this might have more traction, and thinking about where Oakland students could benefit from an asset-based perspective. I have learned so much from Peter and Lily over the years, and one of the things I learned from Peter as a longtime advocate in the legal and policy arena is that over time, different kind of different arenas of policy have affordances and opportunities that come up, and others are less receptive. So, for example, if you look at the current Supreme Court composition, you're not going to aim to try to make change in the positive direction by presenting things to that particular court membership. But then you might also look to state legislatures where you might make progress. And so there, kind of, because education is complex and there's a federal component, a state component, a local, and then a school and classroom component, you can think about sort of as an actor, as many of you are in this group, as an actor, where is the time, what is the place I should be striking right now, and what are some moments? And if I could have the next slide. I'm sorry, I'm not with Peter and Emma now. There are different arenas, and one of them is really our California state context. In 2017, so that was 3 years ago, California, the State Board of Education adopted a new policy for English learners that replaced the old one that was put in place through Proposition 227, which was the English only initiative, and that virtually banned bilingual education through the state. And it brought back much of the asset-oriented perspective of programs. So there are 4 principles that the state policy is supported by. One is the asset orientation and the responsiveness of schools to the needs, as well as the assets of the students. The intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access, and that really speaks very much to the point that Lily made about curriculum needing to give the kinds of meaty, intellectually engaging invitations into high levels of literacy that we want to expect students, so that they're not getting watered down materials conveyed within the, let's say, the English language development component of the class. Our current language is the designated ELD component, but that really the instruction ought to be meaningful throughout the curriculum. The third is the system conditions that support effectiveness, and that includes the wise choices in the materials that are adopted for the students, as well as what Peter referred to in the prong 2 of Castañeda, the implementation and attention to this. So no curriculum itself is, in the old days, people talked about things like teacher proofing the curriculum so that teachers couldn't mess it up. They would, and so forth. And those were the old days. But no curriculum is going to be successful without good professional development and professional learning support, as well as other system conditions, including the appreciation by leadership, the principals of the schools that manage the instructional environment of the school district, and how they manage the district responsibilities around curriculum, professional development. I think it's really critical, and we see this in many states where there's very segregated, separate instructional pieces for English language development versus content, that we need greater integration, so that all teachers, not just the teachers of English language development, but all teachers, the math teachers, the science teachers, own the problem of how to make sure that all English learners and all students have access to the curriculum. And that really is not, it is certainly a teacher's responsibility, but it really is building leadership, district leadership responsibility to make sure that there's a culture of instruction and instructional kind of management that all teachers have. And so there are a lot of parallels to special education and students with disabilities, that they're really not to be in segregated programs, that the richness of the good curricular content needs to be accessible to all students. And then there's sort of the alignment and articulation across systems, that this is very much a systems perspective. And partly that's because California very much has this, current policy in which local school districts have significant authority over what they do, and they have their own accountability plans and funding formulas that are, kind of locally managed and so forth. So all of these kind of need to be put together. Can I have the next slide, please? So who's responsible for making sure that this system works? And I think I'm going to sort of put it back on all of us. That is, so the nice theory that Peter laid out in Castañeda was that you need programs based on sound professional judgment and research. You need implementation of those programs for a period of time. And then you need some kind of evidence at the end. And evidence could be anything from observation, it could be anecdotal in that sense, to much more systematic. It could be including the CASP and the ELAC, the English language assessment tests and so forth that the state administered. That could be more summative. It could be anywhere in between those two. And then finally, there has to be kind of some adjustment, because we know that in a complex system, you're not going to get things right the first time, but you want to be making progress in the right direction. So you need to make adjustments either to the materials, the theory that are used. You need to maybe improve the implementation. So if Peter's 800 hours in Florida are not enough, let's do 1,600 hours, or let's double, much to the horror. But you need to make those adjustments. But who should be asking those questions? And I want to put this back to all of us. It's not just sort of the experts. It's not just the state board or the State Department of Education or the district administrators of different programs or the building people. It really is up to us to ask these questions, which is, what would give us confidence that our children are getting everything they need for English language development and challenging content and literacy, right? What's going to give you as an advocate in the community the confidence that your school is delivering this, that the district is doing everything they can to support that, and so forth. We heard evidence of some of that through the choice of the curricular materials. That's great. But then following that up, what is the professional development that the teachers are receiving? What are the principals hearing about this program so that they can make sure that you get integration of responsibilities for English language development teachers and content teachers? The second question is, what is the quality of the curriculum materials in terms of their academic rigor and accessibility for English learners? We heard that from Lily about the confidence that she has that the materials are good. Well, Lily's a great expert, but what more can we ask for? We have some organizations that do reviews of curriculum and so forth. We can go there. What more is there? Is there research evidence? Are there universities engaged in research to look at the efficacy of these programs? Those are the kinds of questions that one ought to be asking. Are teachers getting the support that they need? And how do they know the quality of their professional development? And then, I think this is a hard question to ask, but it is really one that has to be asking, which is, what is the learning disposition of the school and of the district, right? How oriented are they to look at the evidence on the programs and to make adjustments for the better in the implementation of these programs? How do they monitor their own learning and progress? Do they have a culture of learning so that they learn from practices in other classrooms within the school? Do they learn from other schools within the district? Do they learn from other districts within the state? What is the learning orientation? Because we're in a community of practice that needs to be improving. And are they getting better? And how do they know if they're getting better? I think these are very legitimate questions for advocates to be asking about the health of a system and being able to not just choose the right curriculum, but to successfully implement it and to monitor it so that it continues to get better. So I think I'm going to stop there. I got the 5-minute or the warning flash from Jethro. Thank you very much. So I guess that's the last message. Thank you.
Okay. So if we are close to the end here, then perhaps we should.
Go.
All right, Emma?
Go ahead. Thank you, Lily. Thank you. I just would like to make, right now, I would like to make a reminder to teachers, to all educators, the participation, the importance that participation of parents play in the education of their children. We must, schools must and can be a bridge between the parents and the community. We must remember that too, as Kenji was talking about, the importance, things that we need to remember. So to us, that is a very important. With that, I would like to thank Lily, Kenji, Peter, as well as the audience that participated in this program. Thank you very much. Lily?
Yeah, I just want to say a few words in closing too. Oakland has classes, bilingual, dual language classes for a few of the languages spoken by children in their homes. I want to remind everyone that, these kids, these languages are our resources, our state's resources for a multilingual future. The children will learn English. Sooner or later, every last one of them will learn English. It's the schools. It's a big issue for the schools, but not for the kids. They will learn English, keeping their home languages, keeping them strong, being able to communicate with family, with members of their own community, being able to communicate in adult language as they grow older will be a real challenge for everyone. And I hope that when you're working with students whose languages are not supported in school, remind them how important it is that they keep those assets that they bring from home to school. When you communicate with parents, let them know that they have a big responsibility to keep their languages of the children and of the home alive. They do it by talking to their kids. They do it by teaching them the things that people in their culture need to learn as they grow up. They need to know how you can communicate important ideas, and they need to know something of their own heritage as they become Americans through our school system. So I hope that we have some chance for discussion at this point, and I will turn it over to Jethro, and I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lily. And thank you also to Peter and to Kenji and to Emma. I learned so much. I'm really, really thankful on behalf of the OLC for everything that you've shared with us. And I will open it up to the chat. Are there any folks that have any questions? And so if one question that came up for me, and I think you spoke about this somewhat, Kenji, is the lack of representation in the teaching field. So, what can be done to encourage more teachers that look like the students that they're teaching? What can we do so that we're not in a situation of just having, teachers that cycle through and don't have perhaps the deepest connection and understanding and language skills that are necessary?
It's really just such a, to me, I'm sure others have thoughts on this too, but it's just such a systemic problem, including the job status of teaching and so forth. So it's really kind of a space where I feel like lots of innovation and disruption is sort of needed to kind of get into that mix. I'll just share that in some of the rural communities that I've been in Central Valley, for example, there are efforts by districts to try to kind of recruit students to go into education and teaching from early on. These are also communities where teaching is is more economically viable than it would be in the Bay Area. But I think sort of way systems school systems could address the pipeline from the very beginning. Would be one way, but I would just respond that it's a place where all kinds of innovation, and that would include things like Teach for America and other kinds of efforts, but also alternatives to traditional teacher education programs and so forth, and just but the recruitment is absolutely is key, and I think part of it is making the profession more desirable and just finding ways to do that.
Well, yeah.
Peter?
Yeah. I'd just like to add something. We've actually been working with the talent division of Oakland. I keep wanting to say HRD around this, and I've done a fair amount of research generally on how you get not just Latino but African American teachers into the schools, but our primary focus has been trying to get Latino and particularly bilingual teachers into the Oakland schools. Have a student body of almost 50% Latino students, but about 15%, 16% of the teachers are Latino. And one of the crucial things that has to be done is to make these schools, the school that you're talking about, the system you're talking about, look like a place that's welcoming to the students.
Yeah.
Or welcoming to the people you're trying to recruit. In Oakland, and I mean, nobody's shorting them at all. In Oakland, African Americans have often been seen as the Oakland system has seemed welcoming to African Americans, and they've been reasonably successful in recruiting African American teachers. There has been less of that feeling with respect to Latinos, and I think that's changing somewhat, but there needs to be formal programs to make Latino teachers feel that this is a place that they could come, they can be nurtured, they can succeed,
Absolutely.
not only with students, but also in their own careers. And so you've got to do stuff like that.
Thank you for that. We are almost out of time. I just wanted to ask one more question that we had in the chat. And these are great discussions. If we could continue these discussions in Whova, that would be fantastic. So start these chats, start these threads. So Veronica Chavez asks, any thoughts on translanguaging as a tool for honoring and leveraging the language skills of our emergent bilinguals? Any thoughts on translanguaging?
I'm going to leave that to Kenji. Kenji, what do you think?
I think of translanguaging, which is the sort of not thinking of bilingualism as switching between the two languages, but rather as a language itself, which is the bilingual language. And I think it's, I know that distinction may sound somewhat academic, but it is out there. And I do think that it's a new way of trying to honor the assets and the in some ways the uniqueness of the language setting. And I think communicating that would be good. I do worry that, like other terminologies that the field has used, including bilingualism, that it risks becoming a political target by people looking for something that they're just trying to kind of a way to make fun of pointy-headed academics or whatever. And we don't want to end up there. But it is a way of trying to honor the uniqueness of the situation. Lily, you threw that hot potato at me. I wonder.
I'm sorry, sorry, sorry.
It was not intentional. Okay.
Yeah.
You did very well on
well-
that, Kenji. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, we don't need to do more to make ourselves targets of the that are out
Exactly.
there. But often, we're going to be targets regardless. So sometimes I think, we just do what we need to do. There is one rather long question from Wes. I'm sorry, Wes, we don't have time. We are at time. But please, if you can post that question in Whova, hopefully some of our folks can get to it afterwards. Please take a look at the resources that were posted in the agenda. I look forward to seeing everyone in our afternoon sessions. I look forward to grabbing a bite to eat. And is it okay if I put let's see, I'm going to stop sharing screen. Is it okay if I put your contact details in the chat, Emma?
Yes.
So Emma is the
Yes.
director of the Coalition Education for Hispanics. So any questions we can also route to her as well. So if you could.
And I also just put my email address in
Yes,
the
please.
chat. So
Everyone can do that. That would be great. Thank you. And thanks again for everyone for coming. This was really amazing. So much to chew on. I'm going to be thinking about this for a while. So have a wonderful lunch
hi,
and
Veronica.
take care.
Veronica. Sorry, we didn't have time to answer your question.
Oh no, we
It's
did.
okay. We'll talk later. And it was a good answer to start.
Sorry.
Hey, Vero.
Comb your hair, mija.
Good to see you.
So it's
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey,
Bye-bye,
bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Getro.
Bye-bye.
And
Thank you,
thank you,
Jethro.
Getro.
hey, it's been fun.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.